Hello world and hello universe. My name is David Malan, and I teach a course called CS50 at Harvard University, which is our introductory course in computer science for majors and non-majors. It's a course in which we use C as our first programming language, followed by Python, followed by a bit of SQL, and then followed ultimately by a bit of web programming, which is to say that students in this class, most of whom have never programmed before, ultimately learn a little something new about all of those languages and all of the associated technologies. But among the technologies we actually don't use, and indeed I'm here today because we don't let our students use yet, is GitHub Copilot. And to my left here, I'm pleased to be joined by GitHub Copilot's product lead, my friend Shuyin Zhao.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shuyin. I'm leading the Copilot product team. Very excited to be on the same stage with David to talk about Copilot in the classroom. To be honest, it's been over 20 years since my work is being evaluated by professor. And now as much as I'm excited, I'm also a little bit nervous, especially knowing David actually banned our work, right?
Well, for those in the audience here, particularly educators, teachers, and also students, would you mind giving folks a sense of what Copilot actually is and what it can do in a classroom?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so Copilot is your AI pair programmer, and just as the name indicates, you first need to have a pilot in the driver's seat, and in this case, the pilot is your human software developers, and the Copilot is there to pair with the developer to make them more efficient and productive. Essentially, you can install Copilot as extension for your favorite code editor, like VS Code, Visual Studio, JetBrains family of IDE, and NeoVim. It can provide real-time suggestions based on the comment and code snippet you are typing. It is the result of work of collaboration between Microsoft, GitHub, and OpenAI. So the real magic really lies in the OpenAI Codex model, which is trained on billions of lines of public available source code and natural language. And we made a version available to our individual developers on June 21st. And now the team is working super hard to deliver a version to our business customers by early December.
Okay, and you mentioned training, which in computer science and in the world of artificial intelligence, machine learning, is now a term of art. For those less familiar, what do you mean when you say that Copilot is trained on code?
Yeah, so the principal building block of Copilot is the OpenAI Codex model. And it is very powerful pre-trained large language model. Essentially, you feed into the training data. In this case, it's your source code and natural language text. And the model teaches itself to recognize those complex patterns like programming syntax and language semantics. And it does this to the point that it has enough knowledge, so it could start making predictions itself. So in another word, you give it a partial text and or partial code, it starts, to predict output that fill in the missing pieces and blanks with learned patterns. On top of what Codex does, Copilot also draws context from your surrounding text in your open file or neighboring tabs and send them to the model along with the code comment you are typing. So the model predictions the model makes is actually much more relevant. That is actually the secret sauce of Copilot, because it feels very personalized, it feels understand you, it's made just for you.
So if I write really good code, it helps me write even better code, and if I write really bad code, I get more of the same?
It's customized just for you.
Okay, good. And so when it comes to actually using a tool like this, it sounds similar to a feature that I think a lot of us who use IDEs are familiar with, like IntelliSense, where I'm already getting autocomplete even before Copilot existed.
Yeah.
So what really is the line between something like IntelliSense and this?
Yeah, so absolutely, I think the interaction mode of Copilot is very similar to IntelliSense and other auto-completion features. But it actually does much more than that. So the wow factor that we heard from our users is essentially you can just describe a problem in natural language comment. And the Copilot actually generates the entire solutions for you. Right? So it's like bringing the collective knowledge from developers around the world just right at your fingertips. So it saves you time to go to the internet to search for a solution and keep developers right in the flow. Besides that, Copilot, we can also generate boilerplate and repetitive code for you. It's actually free up developers from so they can focus on the high-value task, like complex problem solving. That is actually one of the key reasons, like why developers love Copilot, because it's not only make them faster, but also is bring joy and happiness because they feel more fulfilled with their daily job. Yeah, that's just truly magic.
No, and I do think that's persuasive, certainly in the context of productivity and writing boilerplate code and solving problems that would otherwise just take more time than it needs to. But I feel like as an educator on behalf of the audience here, like exactly what it does well is perhaps exactly what someone like me wouldn't want a tool to do, because it almost sounds like an overly helpful teacher, an overly helpful student, an overly helpful classmate. And so I know there's been chatter about this in the CS education community already online and in conferences already. How do you and the team think about that sort of competing concern?
Yeah, so we definitely hear the concern from the learning communities that Copilot could impact, especially beginner student learning experiences. So David, as you know, like at GitHub, first and foremost, we are a developer-first and community-based company. So deeply engaging and contributing back to the community has always been our top priority. So Copilot, as a very novel AI-assisted tool, does have the potential to change how software is being developed. And the AI generative model technology that we use to power Copilot is also in its infancy. So as such, it became extremely important for us to engage with our learning communities early on and listen to feedback. So one of the first steps we did is to make a Copilot for free to both teachers and students. And our hope is for our CS educators like you to develop an understanding of Copilot and its educational potential, and eventually integrate it into the CS curricular, to enhance the classroom experiences for both teachers and students. David, you and I, we discussed, right? We live in this new world of AI-assisted software development. It is really our mission, to partner with CS educators like you to smooth the transition into this new world. And along the way, we improve the effectiveness of Copilot in the classroom setting.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now it's my turn to ask you questions,
Okay.
David. Yeah, so you have been teaching CS50 at Harvard. So how do you think about its implication on education?
Yeah, no, I do think technologies like these are inevitable in a good way. I think the opportunity at hand isn't just for productivity's sake and to save students keystrokes, because I think especially in introductory courses like ours, precisely the goal of those first few weeks is for students to develop the muscle memory and the mechanics and recognize the syntax of even in the simplest of programs like Hello World and everything that comes after that. So I think taking away that sort of progression is probably a net negative. But I think the positive opportunity here is that when the AI really does become an approximation of, or even longer term, an alternative to a human teacher, particularly if you just don't have those human resources local, such that the tool can not just finish your thought for you or worse, hand you your next thought, but perhaps ask more teacher-friendly questions that are a bit more rhetorical. For instance, as opposed to showing me the for loop that I probably should write here, perhaps asking more inquisitively, perhaps do you want to write a for loop here? Or are you sure you want to nest the code that many times? Or to provide a sort of observant eye that a good teacher or even a stronger classmate could provide without just actually handing the solution. And I think that's how we think about it. Right now, these technologies, Copilot and others, are sort of really good at not only finishing your current thought, but also giving you indeed your second and your third thought, and that's too helpful right now. But I think once there's API hooks or just configurations where you can throttle it back and forth to attenuate it for your particular students, your particular class, your particular assignments, I mean, then I think it becomes a really positive uplift, especially for larger online courses too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, David, we have heard your concern, about this impact. So as the technology evolves, we firmly believe there is a potential for Copilot to become the teaching assistant for students, for beginner students. Another concern, we have been hearing from the community, is about plagiarism. Because of the code reuse nature, what constitutes plagiarism has always been a debate, and detecting plagiarism is even harder a problem. So do you think a Copilot make the problem worse?
No, I don't think it necessarily makes the problem worse. I think the reality is, in particularly introductory courses like ours, we do look for patterns of dishonesty as by cross-comparing all student submissions, maybe even looking at past submissions as well, and common patterns sort of pop up. And so insofar as Copilot is presumably going to generate similar patterns, at least for similar problems, I think we're still going to detect that kind of behavior through our same channels. What it does potentially put risk of is students being able to do so without leaning on another human, for instance, or engaging someone else other than themselves. So I do think we'll still detect it, but I think fundamentally there's been nothing stopping functionally a student from being a little too helpful already with their classmate or leaning on tools like Stack Overflow or the like. So I don't think it necessarily makes the problem any worse, but I think it does put all the more of an onus or opportunity on the teacher to educate students, ideally more positively, where those lines are, when you should turn such tools on, when you should turn such tools off. And for instance, in our case, I don't think it should be turned on in its current form at the beginning of the semester, but hands down by the end of the semester when they already understand the code that it's ideally generating for them, and now it's indeed just helping them accelerate their work, then I think it's a good thing. But at the end, not so much the beginning.
Yeah, I like that. I think, for AI tool like a Copilot, it definitely presented a bunch of challenges. In the meanwhile, bringing opportunities. So, as we're ready to tackle them together, what is your advice to fellow teachers?
Yeah, I think if you've only heard about Copilot thus far and seen and heard of tools like it, I think first and foremost, just try it out. I think the most enlightening, if not unsettling thing we did a few weeks back, thanks to a colleague of mine, was run Copilot on CS50's first homework assignment, or second homework assignment just past Hello World. And pretty much by way of a sequence of tab completions was my colleague able to generate the entirety of that solution. Perhaps not surprising in our case especially, because one, the homework assignment early on is relatively simple, at least in retrospect, once you have a few weeks of computer science under your belt. And two, because CS50 happens to be freely available as open courseware on edX and on YouTube and the like, the reality is we've probably been helping train such models with quite a few solutions out there. So that's admittedly a bit anomalous, but we then fast forwarded toward the end of our semester where we have students build a full-fledged web application using Python and more. And even that, with pretty much some tab completions, maybe a couple of English comments, was Copilot also amazingly, worrisomely able to answer those problems as well. And so that just put into perspective for us. And I think for introductory courses, the CS1s, the CS2s of the world, probably a little too soon to maybe be a net positive in those early weeks especially. But for higher level courses where students already have some mental model for and some mechanics of programming under their belt, then I think it does genuinely offer an opportunity to help onboard them to boilerplate code, to APIs, to avoiding having to troll through documentation, or worse, undocumented code to figure out common usage patterns. So that I think is a win. And I think I would encourage teachers to sort of decide for themselves where that line is, as opposed to just putting your foot down, figuring out where the healthy balance is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that you will definitely hear David loud and clear, Copilot as today's shape and form. We're not there yet, but I believe that one day, we could become a teaching assistant for our students.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being receptive to this and for engaging us and so many of the folks here in exactly these kinds of pilots.
Yeah. So it's absolutely a pleasure to always talk to David. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good to see you. Thank you all.
Okay, bye.